You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got yet more bad news for Donald Trump as far as the Epstein files are concerned. Can you explain the new update out of the Justice Department?
Yeah, Brian, this is hard to believe because after Kash Patel issued a splashy memo back in July assuring the American people that he had done an exhaustive search, he found everything that there possibly was to be found regarding the Epstein files, the evidence, the information, the documents. He's got it all. And he said we reviewed it and decided nobody else should be investigated. Well, now we have new reporting that the Department of Justice is claiming, oh, whoops, we just found 1 million new Epstein documents. Now, Brian, let's put that in perspective. The Department of Justice, the FBI, Pam Bondi, were telling the people previously that they had it all and it was made up of about 700,000 documents. But apparently they didn't realize they were missing 1 million more documents. So now they are peddling to the American people that they will continue to be in violation of federal law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which required DOJ to turn everything over, reveal it all publicly by December 19th. Now they're telling us, well, our bad. We're going to need more time, more personnel, to devote to going through the 1 million new documents we just stumbled upon. And we can talk in a minute about where they stumbled upon, this batch of 1 million new documents. And, we'll try to get to releasing it sometime in the future. They seem perfectly content to remain in violation of federal law every minute of every day, completely unapologetically. Perhaps they know that because they are the cops, they are the prosecutors, ain't nobody going to hold them accountable for violating the law.
Okay, so let's talk about these documents. Is there anything to suggest what we may be able to see in these documents in particular, and whether they, might be what we're all looking for, which is, offering up some information on possible co-conspirators?
I think these will be some of the most directly relevant, I can't yet say incriminating, but some of the most directly relevant documents and evidence pertaining to both the grand jury investigations and the prosecutions in New York of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Of course, they were in the process of prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein when he turned up dead in his jail cell, so obviously that did not culminate in a trial. But the Ghislaine Maxwell case did culminate in a trial. And where are we being told they found these new 1 million documents? At the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office. Now, let's think about that. And Brian, I can't help myself. I have to read for our viewers just a little bit of the memo that Kash Patel issued, promising us that he had done an exhaustive search. Here is how that memo opens. He says, as part of our commitment to transparency, the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have conducted an exhaustive review of the investigative holdings relating to Jeffrey Epstein. To ensure that the review was thorough, the FBI conducted digital searches of its databases, hard drives, and network drives, as well as physical searches of squad areas, locked cabinets, desks, closets, and other areas where responsive material may have been stored. These searches uncovered a significant amount of material, including more than 300 gigabytes of data and physical evidence. So that was Kash Patel assuring the American people that, he looked in every drawer. He, checked all the storage rooms. He was looking in broom closets. He left no stone unturned. And Kash Patel assured us after his exhaustive search, they had it all well in hand. But apparently, Brian, they forgot to check with the other part of the Department of Justice, the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office, which actually prosecuted the Maxwell and Epstein cases. That is where all of the evidence, information, and documents naturally would be found. And mind you, this is all the Department of Justice. It is one organization. That would be like me saying, man, I'm looking for something in my right pocket, and I've done an exhaustive search, and I can't find it. Oh, wait a minute. It's in my left pocket.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you had mentioned before, this idea that the DOJ isn't too vexed about the fact that they're violating the law right now, the Epstein Transparency Act, which required that all the files be released a couple of weeks ago at this point. Is there any legal exposure being shouldered by the people who work at the DOJ, or is it because, they're the cops on the beat and you can't prosecute the cops, at least right now, that they have absolutely nothing to worry about?
No accountability. I can't see any accountability on the horizon. First and foremost, the Epstein Files Transparency Act has no sanction attached to a violation of that federal law. It's kind of an ugly secret that so many federal laws require that people do things or require that people refrain from doing things. But if they violate the law, there's actually no punishment, no sanction, right? They can't be tried, they can't be convicted, they can't be fined, they can't be imprisoned. But it may give rise to civil suits. So I think you have victims of Epstein's crimes, because let me hasten to mention one of the things that we did see released, and it was a product of what was up in the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office, was that email traffic between and among prosecutors saying, okay, there are 10 Epstein co-conspirators. Brian, we saw that and we were like, wait a minute. Those are 10 people that have never been held accountable, yet the prosecutors had concluded they were co-conspirators in Jeffrey Epstein's conspiracy to sex traffic girls. So that raised enormous questions. So I think the victims could possibly have standing to bring a lawsuit to try to hold Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, accountable for, this cavalier violation of a law that requires information to be released that could do what? Could move in the direction of accountability for the crimes perpetrated against Epstein's victims. So, in theory, there may be some vehicles that people can use to try to hold Bondi and Blanche accountable, but, it's going to be a bit of an uphill slog if the victims want to file lawsuits like that.
In the lead up to the first tranche of files being released, that took 30 days and they still didn't have it in time. That was 700,000 documents, as you mentioned. This is going to be 1 million documents, as you mentioned. And so if they needed over 30 days to go through and redact, and of course they over-redacted because, you and I both know that they're just out there to protect dear leader Donald Trump. But if it took them that long to redact the documents that they had already released, and there's more than, there's 130% more documents at SDNY, does that mean that in theory we won't see these documents released until 45 days from now?
I mean, they had weeks and weeks and weeks to prepare for the release of the first batch by December 19th, and they really blew that. They only released a very small fraction of what they then believed were all the documents, 700,000. Here is a really curious bit of reporting that I think will help answer your question in part. So the reporting is that when they found these 1 million documents, the Department of Justice decided to enlist a whole bunch of additional federal prosecutors to help begin poring through these documents and suggesting appropriate redactions. Where did they go to find those prosecutors? They went to a U.S. Attorney's office in southern Florida, the land of Mar-a-Lago and Pam Bondi.
Yeah, and isn't it Eileen Cannon also from southern Florida?
Yeah, so why would they go all the way down there when, Brian, they have a lot of people, including a lot of bureaucrats at the Department of Justice proper, that is headquarters of the Department of Justice. They've got 6 blocks down the street, my former office, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, which, guess what, is the largest U.S. Attorney's Office. They've got the Eastern District of Virginia right across the river within a stone's throw of Main Justice. They've got the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office right there. But they have to go all the way down to South Florida to find federal prosecutors who can assist in this review mission. I find that quite curious.
Yeah, I think curious is a very diplomatic way of putting all of this. If for example they have an office like that filled with let's just say in this thought experiment, you're going to find people that are going to be a little more, have a proclivity toward Donald Trump a little more than what we would see in D.C. or Maryland or Virginia. Is there anybody there to look over these people's shoulders? Is there anybody there to make sure that the redactions are done properly, that we're not just seeing happen what we all kind of expect to happen, which is that, these prosecutors looking into this at the behest of Pam Bondi are just really there to protect not the victims, not seek accountability for the co-conspirators or the accomplices, but rather just to protect Donald Trump?
It's a great question, and my answer is somewhat optimistic given my experience inside the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, for decades. The more people you have involved in the endeavor of reviewing these files, I think the more likely you're going to have people standing up against any attempt to try to bury deeply damaging information about not only Donald Trump, but anybody else who might be criminally involved in Epstein and Maxwell's, conspiracy. So I believe that even though Donald Trump and Pam Bondi have succeeded in either wrongfully terminating or pushing out lots of good career public servants, career federal prosecutors, there are far, far, far more good, solid, honest, ethical career federal prosecutors remaining as part of the Department of Justice, including in all 93 of the United States attorneys' offices around the country and in the territories. So listen, the more eyes you get on these files, the better it is ultimately for guarding against abuses of, for example, the proclivity to over-redact to try to protect Donald Trump.
But then I got to ask, as a follow-up to that, how does a situation come about where all of a sudden, after day one, 16 files that were visible on day one were suddenly redacted? And we know that, a couple of them had Trump's picture. And so how does that happen then?
Well, listen, that didn't have the desired effect because all that did is pique everybody's interest in why in the world would you disclose something which everybody can screenshot and then pull it back. I mean, I have my suspicions, maybe a little call from, the orange stain in the Oval Office. What the hell are you doing releasing pictures of me? I don't know that. That makes some sense to me, right? But listen, the one thing that I think we can bank on is the incompetence of Donald Trump's DOJ leadership, Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, and Kash Patel. And I would expect we're going to see, more blunders along the way.
Well, that's perfectly put. And of course, this isn't the last that we're going to talk about the Epstein files. So for those who want to follow along with any new news on the Epstein files or any other legal news, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. I'm going to put those links right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Great way to support our work, great way to support independent media, and it is and always will be 100% free. So again, those links are right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.
The Justice Department's latest admission on the Epstein files isn't just shocking. It is devastating to the credibility of an institution that has already stretched public trust to its breaking point. After months of insisting that everything had been found, reviewed, and responsibly handled, the DOJ is now telling the American people that more than 1 million additional Epstein-related documents were somehow overlooked. This revelation doesn't merely contradict earlier statements, it destroys them. When federal officials assure the public that an exhaustive search has been completed, only to later claim they missed a volume of material larger than what they originally disclosed, the question is no longer about competence alone, it is about truthfulness. This matters because the Epstein case is not an abstract scandal. It is a crime network involving real victims, real abuse, and real power. The documents in question are not dusty archives of historical curiosity. They are evidence tied to one of the most notorious sex trafficking operations in modern American history. And the idea that the Department of Justice failed to check the very office that prosecuted Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, the Southern District of New York, defies logic. That office was the epicenter of the case. That is where the grand jury records, trial exhibits, emails, and internal communications would naturally reside. To claim they were missed is like claiming you searched a crime scene thoroughly while never entering the room where the crime occurred. What makes this worse is that the DOJ's delay places it in direct violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a law requiring the release of these materials by a specific deadline. That deadline has now passed, and there is no penalty mechanism strong enough to compel compliance. The DOJ knows this. They know there is no criminal sanction for their delay, no automatic enforcement, no immediate consequence, And so the law is treated as optional, while the victims are treated as an inconvenience. This is not how accountability works in a democracy. It is how institutions protect themselves when the truth is too destabilizing. Ari Melber's analysis cuts to the heart of the issue. The problem is not that new documents exist. The problem is that they were always there. These files were created during active federal investigations. They were reviewed, referenced, and discussed by prosecutors. They didn't materialize out of nowhere. They were simply not disclosed. And now that their existence is public, the DOJ's response is not urgency, but delay. More time, more review, more redactions, more excuses. This pattern is familiar because it is strategic. Delay is power. Delay allows narratives to fade, public attention to drift, and accountability to weaken. And the choice of who reviews these documents matters just as much as when they are released. Instead of relying on prosecutors in Washington, Virginia, or New York, offices with proximity and institutional independence, the DOJ reportedly turned to prosecutors in South Florida, a region politically and historically linked to Epstein himself and closely aligned with figures loyal to Donald Trump. That decision raises serious questions, not because every prosecutor there is compromised, but because the optics are indefensible. When public trust is already fragile, the appearance of bias is enough to cause damage, and the stakes could not be higher. We already know from previously released material that prosecutors internally identified at least 10 Epstein co-conspirators who were never charged. That alone shatters the long-standing narrative that Epstein was a lone predator. It confirms what victims have said for years. This was a network, a system, a supply chain of abuse that required facilitators, recruiters, financiers, and protectors. The missing documents may not be smoking guns in the cinematic sense, but they are likely the connective tissue, the emails, financial records, witness statements, and internal assessments that show how decisions were made and why prosecutions stopped where they did. And that brings us to Donald Trump, the legal debunking of a so-called 2028 coup plot underscores a broader truth. Authoritarianism doesn't always arrive in a single dramatic moment. It arrives through erosion, through the normalization of lawlessness, through institutions that stop enforcing rules when enforcement becomes inconvenient. Trump does not need to stage a coup if the system already bends around him. The Epstein case illustrates this perfectly. While Trump was not charged, his name appears in multiple contexts surrounding Epstein. That does not make him guilty of crimes, but it makes transparency essential. Instead, what we have seen is protection through obscurity, over-redaction, withheld materials, delayed releases, and now, the sudden discovery of 1 million documents that were supposedly missed. This is not how justice behaves when it has nothing to hide. And it is not enough to say, the courts will decide, when the DOJ controls what evidence reaches those courts. Transparency delayed is accountability denied. Every day these files remain unreleased is another day victims are told to wait, to be patient, to trust a system that has failed them repeatedly. And patience is not justice. Justice requires action. It requires honesty. It requires courage. The American people are capable of handling the truth, even when it is ugly. What they cannot accept is being lied to. The DOJ's credibility is now on the line, and no amount of bureaucratic language can change that. Either these documents are released fully, lawfully, and without political interference, or history will record this moment as another chapter in a long story of institutional failure. And here is the reality that cannot be escaped. Jeffrey Epstein did not die with his secrets buried. Those secrets are alive in files, databases, and emails that still exist. The question is not whether the truth will come out. The question is how much damage will be done by those who tried to stop it. Because power can delay justice, but it cannot erase it. And when the full record finally surfaces, it will not only expose Epstein's crimes, it will expose who chose silence over accountability. And that reckoning, when it comes, will not be postponed forever.